All right, thank you everyone. Last presentation of the day. I would actually like to encourage you to take a good sitting while. I encourage you to take a moment to stand and stretch. Get that blood flowing a little bit. Yeah. Well, it's just a matter of I don't want to see people fall asleep. So, out of curiosity, how many of you are actually banders of Northern Saw yourself? Yeah, I figured there'd be a bunch of you. This is good to see. For those of you who have not had the pleasure of banding Saw Owls, my sincere condolences, and hopefully it will be in your near future someday. So, very briefly, what I'm going to talk about today, introduce you to some of the natural history of Saw Owls, the general methodology that I was looking at here. Banding station results. This data actually comes from Indiana. That's where I'm originally from.
Please hold the mic, please.
Oh, sorry about that. Use general methodology of what I use, the banding station results. The banding stations are in Indiana, where I'm from, and then also looking at the wing load and body condition index. That was the basis for the paper, and then open discussion that we have. So, natural history. This has come from Birds of North America Online. The Northern Saw owls, boreal breeding, of course. One of the things that's always interesting here, of course, question marks. It's one of the few species of birds left in North America for which we still have some gaps in the knowledge of just general basic natural history here. This is a species that, in particular the wintering grounds, we don't know much about their, we're starting to fill some of those data gaps in terms of what their wintering habitat is like. Notice there's a couple of isolated populations right here, Blackwater State Falls last year. We detected 6 territories of breeding during the breeding season for Northern Saw owls here in Blackwater State Falls State Park, and again down in the another population down in the Great Smoky Mountains. Hard data is, like I said, missing on the wintering. And the main problem with these owls, of course, is things like breeding bird surveys and Christmas bird counts are not a good way to survey these things. You have to, because of our ability to see at night, their nocturnal behaviors, you really have to use some sort of an active method to understand what's going on with them, call them in. In Indiana, the history of Indiana, this is the history of confirmed sightings in the state of Saw owls in the state of Indiana prior to when we started banding in Yellowwood State Forest in Brown County. And you see that dates back to the late 1880s. This is, of course, suddenly when people started doing Christmas bird counts, we started seeing more of them. But notice, even then, typically, it's fewer than 10 in the entire state in any given year. When we started this, of course, using, thank you, David and Scott and Steve, wherever you may be, Project Outlet Banding Station Protocol. We opened up our first station, as I mentioned, in Yellowwood in 2002. I left there in 2012, which is why the data goes to 2012. My sub-banders have been keeping the stations going for me, thankfully. I'm very grateful for that. And my good friend Jess Wen, who helped me get the Yellowwood station started, he opened up a station in his backyard in 2003 in Greene County in New York. Then mainly what we're doing is comparing wing load and body condition indices between the ages, hatch years, just grouping all the adults. I grouped all the adults together because it turns out there's no difference between the different age categories. And then we were comparing the date of arrival and nightly time of capture between. So standard banding techniques for Saw owls. We had usually 6 nets, depending on, we had a couple different stations, usually 6 to 8 mist nets set up. Playing the call of the springtime male territorial advertisement call very, very loudly, over 100 decibels, and to the point where you can't get it out of your sleep. Weeks on end afterwards. And then, of course, stick them in a can, crystal light can preferred. I have to give kudos to my mom for that. She's supplied me numerous crystal light cans over the years. And then the measurements of interest here, we did other measurements. The measurements here are the mass of the owl and, of course, the wing chord. We did both natural wing chord and a flat. And then aging the owls. This is a nice example here where you can see some retained faded feathers right in here, secondaries and primaries right in here with a replaced block of inner secondaries and primaries right in here, indicates owls after second year owl. And then, thanks to David Brinker, we would also sex the individuals using mass differential function of looking at relative proportions of mass to the wing core to determine with 95% accuracy sexes without having to do anything invasive, taking blood samples. So, what we found, there's obviously one thing that really stands out here from our first really big eruption here in Indiana, 2007. But our first year, we had 62 owls, so that, 6 times the kind of statewide average. We were told we were going to be crazy to do this, and like a lot of people who are doing this vertical saw after that, we weren't so crazy after all. And so in 2007, between our 2 stations, we had just under 450 owls between the 2 stations. We're of course this is southern Indiana, so we're the southern end. Looking at owls by age, a lot of variability here, obviously. The big eruption year, lots more younger owls, and then during the subsequent year, you have very few of the younger owls, the hatchier owls. But generally speaking, it's about a 50-50 split throughout the year. So, one of the things we're also looking at is a wind vector in terms of, this is one thing I can say about the differences in the sexes here. On any given night when we were out there, the winds were usually slightly less than 2 kilometers per hour out of the southwest, what you would expect. That's where the prevailing winds are. On nights where we caught what we considered a slow night with either one or no saw-whet owls, the winds were more out of the south and stronger. And winds where the wind conditions where we caught a lot of owls, we consider a good night, either 2 or more, winds were calmer and more out of the west-northwest. And this is what I thought was interesting. Females were with about 1 km/h winds out of the west-northwest, but the males and the unknown owls were caught when the winds were more out of the southwest. And that was still to this day, it's a bit of a brain teaser, but my theory of what's probably going on there is that, of course, we had mainly about 80% females in migration and only about 10%, well, 20% combined males and unknown owls in migration. My guess is that the larger females are keeping the males and the unknown owls further away from the net during those nights in migration. Then on subsequent nights when the females are become net diverse, the males and unknowns are willing to come in. That's my guess is what's going on. And then I started wanting to know about what was going on with the different ages. Like a lot of other saw-whet owl banding stations, we noticed that the hatchier owls, younger owls, were arriving earlier in southern Indiana than the adults, usually about 4 or 5 days earlier than the adults. One of the questions here is, this is a zoo guru issue, or they just have a stronger urge to migrate, or are they undergoing a forced dispersal from the parents, kicking them out of the naval breeding in the mass? The older owls, there's quite a variability here, but the older owls generally were heavier than the younger owls. I started looking at the wing chords, and consistent. This one was very consistent. Again, older owls, the adults, had much longer wing chords than did the younger owls. Not surprisingly, since they're having to grow all their feathers out that first year. So I then wanted to take that information. That's the basics of looking at a body condition index. Body condition index, of course, is the mass divided by the wing chord length. And then wondering, since there's only I've only found in the literature one data set actually measuring the wing load of saw-whet owls, and had a sample size of 3. So I thought, well, let's look at if there's any differences between wing load measurements and compared to the body condition index. Body condition index is obviously much easier to do because in order to do wing load, you have to get surface area. And the way we did surface area, we took photos of the right wing of the owls, and then actually went into Photoshop and really using pixel counts in order to estimate the surface area of the wing that way. Surprisingly, a little bit, we found out that there was no significant differences in the body condition index for these owls by the age. So while the hatch-year owls, they were generally generally lighter in weight and shorter wing chords, their body condition index was the same as the adults. So they should have the same type of fitness for the rigors of migration. This is what I was warning about. The hatch-year owls, this is their first migration, and the question is, and we know, of course, a lot of them have survival issues during that first migration. Are there different strategies for them, or different abilities for them by the time they reach southern Indiana? Are they in worse condition at that point? Turns out they're not in worse condition. Then I started looking at wing load. Wing load we only did in 2007. That was the big year where we had a bunch of owls. And I did it, and one reason it was only done in 2007 is because it is difficult to take all those photographs to be able to do these measurements on the wing load. And one of the things you noticed is there were no differences, and I should have mentioned here, I just realized, ignore those error bars, those are incorrect error bars. I meant to update that. But there are no differences in the wing load between the hatch-year owls and the after-hatch-year owls as well. So no differences in body condition or wing load. So that told me that body condition. And so what I wanted to do, as I mentioned, was to be able to go back and estimate the metabolic rates, which, if any of you have perhaps read Gill, ornithology, or some of the other papers that are out there, you will notice one of the things you can do is look at the mass loss going through the night of these migrants at banding stations. And you will see that there's a significant loss in mass for many species of birds as you go through the night by capture time. And you can estimate their metabolic rates by that. So I decided to try that on these solo owls, since we had a lot of them going through the night. And I got this cloud of data on hatch-year solo owls, stuck a line through it, and to my surprise, it was significant, and it was positive instead of negative. And that was the brain scratcher moment, like, uh-oh, what's going on here? This is not what I was expecting. And then I did the same thing for after-hatch-year owls. Turned out after-hatch-year owls, it's literally a cloud. There was no significant relationship between mass and the time of capture. So we have well over 1,000 data points between all of our owls. I think we ended up with about 550 or so of them were the hatch-year owls altogether. And looking into it further, note this thing right here. The hatch-year owls were also averaging their 10 minutes later per night than were the older owls. So they're gaining mass somehow through the night, and they're arriving later. That was the aha. Something, be able to connect a couple of dots here and figure out what's going on. So we know the hatch-year owls arrived about 4 days earlier than the adults each year. So hatch-year owls appear to leave their natal breeding territories earlier, which from an evolutionary standpoint gives them an advantage. They get to the winter breeding or feeding grounds first. So they kind of first dibs on the food before the more experienced adults get there. These guys, they're new to hunting to begin with, and then they're also going through their first migration. So that gives them a nice advantage in that regard. And then also, they are on any given night, they were arriving 10 minutes later than the adults, and they were gaining mass through the night. So it looks to me like what is happening is that these solo owls are actually lingering before they decide to migrate each night. Lingering to feed, get a good meal in their belly, then they'll take off and start their migration that particular night, if they choose to migrate that night. We do know that they'll often hang around an area for as much as up to a month before they continue their migration. So likely linger around to feed, and then of course that then leaves for the adults. Then these more experienced adults may be began migration later in that particular season, that fall season, and then they were less likely to forage before they decided to continue moving on. Like the way I thought of it as a better faith in their own ability to hunt and be able to capture food. So they just took off when they were ready to migrate. The conditions were good, they're going to migrate, and have faith that there will be food at the other end when they get there. So what I'm working on now that I've moved into West Virginia, I'm trying to expand the Project OwlNet into more stations here in West Virginia. I know that We've got one station out in the Fairmont area right now. We're trying to get another station started at Watersmith Memorial State Park outside of Clarksburg. I'm in the process of training some sub-banders to help me do this, since, as we noted, I'm now in administration, it means actually to sleep every once in a while, as opposed to band birds. And then we're also studying, working with Rich Bailey, who I believe many of you saw yesterday, working with Rich Bailey to study the breeding population of saw-whet owls here, the isolated breeding population of saw-whet owls here in West Virginia. We did a survey of the saw-whet owls last year. This coming summer, we're going to be doing some stable isotopes of carbon and nitrogen, capturing saw-whet owls, sampling feathers, and also capturing small mammals and invertebrates to assess what their trophic webs are, what they're eating, the relative proportions, what their prey items are. And then the thought, my concern for this breeding population, of course, with climate change, that the red spruce habitat that they seem to be tied to is going to disappear, and whether or not there may be that habitat is that red spruce habitat is also tied to a particular food source. Maybe the food source could wink out before the red spruce does, or vice versa. So anything that we can do to help inform the conservation of the species here in this state. And I hope to, at some point, be able to do some radio, satellite, or geolocator work with these owls. Because one of the things we often wonder about with these isolated populations, where exactly are they going? Just do simple downslope migrations. So some of you went out last night, Alan, is that right? Did you? And I heard you had. Did you guys detect one? Yeah, one maybe. Yeah, that's the way they are. They're extremely secretive. It takes a lot of training and practice to get good at detecting the species. Yeah, I can't tell you. We had 6 territories in this park last summer, and then I participated in the Christmas bird count here this past December. Granted, it was very warm then, thanks to El Nino, but I had 2 that were still apparently hanging on in the park during December. And that's one of the questions: how many of them are leaving, and are they heading south to Alabama, or are they staying in this same latitude, just heading down slope on lower elevations? Anyway, who do I have to acknowledge for this? Sassafras Audubon Society has put up all the money. This is all completely a volunteer project, and Sassafras Audubon Society bought all of our misnets and banding supplies. Chipper Woods Bird Observatory, Dr. Ron Wise is my original master bander. I've obviously got my own master banding permit now, and I've got my sub-banders who will maintain the station from here on out. So that's what we're up to, and hopefully we can get some more people to join in and expand the study, particularly here in West Virginia. I'll open up for any questions you guys may have from here.